It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for staying with us. Let's bring you this discussion now. The new changes to the social grants are now in effect. The increases were announced by the Minister of Finance, during this year's budget speech. The department has now introduced new measures to deal with irregular payments to beneficiaries. Let's discuss this further. We're joined this afternoon by Matshidiso Lencoasa, who is a budget researcher at Section 27. Tsidi, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for sneaking into studio. The changes, just on paper, they seem like they are a good thing in terms of the monies that are to be collected from people who were not the intended beneficiaries of social grants. What's your reading just on that point?
Sure. So that regulation about ensuring that the intended beneficiaries are the ones who receive the funding, on the surface it is a good thing, and it is in line with similar grants and interventions, because it is important that the people who most need it are the ones who receive it. However, I think when it comes to these sort of things, we need to be looking at it from a systematic level. And what we've seen, both as Section 27 and as part of the BJC, so the Budget Justice Coalition, is that the Department of Social Development is one of many government departments that are being defunded over time. So we're seeing reports of, well, there's underfunding or below inflation increases to various sectors. And how this manifests in the real world or with the department is that this department is quite undercapacitated for to ensure that the money that is given to, or that it actually arrives. So the quality of spend isn't as great as it should be. And one of the reasons for that is because there's an insufficient investment in systems to ensuring that, seamless systems. So there has been a report that about 13% of people who are, who applied and were supposed to receive grants didn't actually receive the grants. So there is criticism or reports around the application process, the appeals process, whether that's just, and whether there are enough processes to ensure that the people who are who are supposed to receive the money are the ones who are actually receiving it. So really we should be looking at it from a systematic level and calling for improved investment in the capacity of the Department of Social Justice to ensure that that they can actually implement this regulation, but also that all the people who are eligible and should be receiving this grant actually do receive it.
Yeah, I mean, if we just take a look at the hike that was announced, it's 20 Rand. It takes the relief of distress grant to 370 Rand a month. And we know, as people living in this country, that 20 Rand extra doesn't take you very far.
Sure. Yeah. So the amount, in fact, the 350 originally is already insufficient. If you think about the poverty line and the food poverty line every month being at about 760 Rand a month. So it is quite insufficient. And generally, as civil society, we welcome increases that are in line with inflation. So even though that 20 Rand seems like quite a little, and it is insufficient, but it is in line with inflation, so it should be welcomed. But if you think about that 350 was actually introduced in 2020 in response to COVID, the impact of COVID on the economy. 350 Rand today and 350
4 years later.
Yeah, it has been frozen. So yes, we welcome the 20 Rand or the increase in the sense that it's in line with inflation, but really we need more if we're really going to protect the most marginalized people in this country.
It sort of makes you think, about the discussion around the basic income grant and just how far we are from getting anywhere near implementing something like a BIG.
It's true, and I mean, this social relief of distress grant is one intervention that could pave the way for this. We're seeing that because it was initially supposed to be for COVID, but every year it keeps getting extended in terms of the period, and when it doesn't, there is some form of unrest. And it's clear that there is a necessity for it, especially with the economy that we have, which over the past few decades, even in times of economic growth, we still struggle with unemployment. And so we know that a large proportion of this country, many of these people in this country have been excluded from participating meaningfully in the economy. We need some form of intervention. And so, yes, we do need some form of a way, paving the way and a sustainable way to get a universal basic income grant. But yet 20 Rand increase and these regulations make us feel like it's quite far from where we need to be to protect marginalized people.
The other issue that sort of worries me, just taking a look at these new regulations, is this issue around suspending the payment of the grant if beneficiaries don't keep their details up to date. And, you know, given the level of connectivity in our country, given how much it costs to travel from one point to another, given perhaps how many elderly people rely on this kind of grant, it seems like a measure that will criminalize almost my inability to change my details because of my age, because of accessibility and so on.
It's true. And to make it worse, that this grant is one that has been criticized for the database takes a while to update. And so there are what we are talking about, those systematic issues that plague the grant, that prevent people who are supposed to receive the grants from being successful. And so it is a systematic issue, and it just feels as though the department is pushing the onus on the beneficiaries rather than building their capacity to ensure that as many of the intended beneficiaries get the funding. And that is also something that the Pay the Grants campaign has made a submission to Parliament, which I implore people to explore, which they do say it just seems like there's an onus, a push of the onus to the beneficiaries and not the department.
Yeah, and you know, I also wonder, just from a practical point of view, if we're going to try and get back the money that was paid irregularly, so paid to someone who the money was not intended for, and that person is one of the millions of unemployed in our country, isn't able to access or pay back the state for goodness knows how many months of irregular payments. You know, how are we going to enforce this kind of regulation?
It's true. How does the Department of Social Development
How are they going to get the money back?
When there's struggles even within the government, various government departments to get that kind of funding? It speaks to the underfunded nature of these departments, but also what does that actually mean? You're right, that is a good question of what happens on the ground. Does that put more beneficiaries who maybe are considered unqualified, but like you mentioned, they are unemployed and are probably unlikely or unable to pay that? Does that create a debt? Do we create a citizenship of people who are in debt to the government? Are we criminalizing people who are just struggling with the economy that, you know, they were promised all forms of things, whether it be jobs, these forms of interventions and all their, you know, so there is an issue of what does it actually mean for the intended beneficiary? And I think that's probably the greatest issue with these budget decisions, is that they don't foreground the lived experience of people on the ground who have to deal with these intended beneficiaries, and that's why these interventions don't work as effectively as they could.
Yeah, and you know, especially because the department itself has failed the test on many occasions to disperse the grants and to be trustworthy, so to speak. You know, their systems have failed several times. People have been denied grants several times on the basis of a technicality, of a basis of not confirming little minor details. People have been made to wait an additional month. You know, so who is the department to say? So where do we move on from here? Because these regulations are now in place. We are on board with getting back the money, technically speaking, for people who have passed away, who no longer need to be paid their grants, etc., etc. But so where to from now, insofar as these regulations is concerned?
Sure. I think in terms of implementation, I think there will be people who welcome the increase, the 20 Rand, even though it is small, but because other areas of our governments and other areas that they the services that they depend on are also defunded. So clinics, hospitals, schools, and even NPOs that rely on DSD funding are also being defunded. So it just seems that on the surface we might welcome a somewhat increase to this grant because it's unlike other areas, but then there's a concern that this increase, that 20 Rand, is going to be used by the beneficiaries to mask the impact of other budget cuts. And so really, this is just another chart. Like, yes, it is a political, an election year, so some political decisions are made. And I think that it's in this context, and it's really important to remember that we do need to foreground human rights and budget decisions, and that's why we continue to call on budgets that are that have human rights impact assessments to prevent some of the hardships that could that could come from decisions like this.
Or at least to, as you say, foregrounded in the decisions. Matshidiso Lencoasa, let me thank you for your time. Thanks for coming into studio. Matshidiso is a budget researcher at Section 27.